Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, July 5th, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, day after July 4th, a lot of people are taking four-day weekend. It's still sort of semi-like a vacation day, and we're all going to be kind of a little bit laid back and relaxed here. Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 to talk about the issues that she thinks are of grave concern and her unique perspective on all of that. But as I pointed out to a lot of our readers over at whatreallyhappened.com, it was a very quiet 4th of July. The fireworks pretty much were canceled for all the military bases because of sequestration. Oh, we don't have the money to celebrate the 4th of July anymore. There was one major government-sponsored approved fireworks show over at Ala Moana, but we didn't even bother going out to look at that here. And, we're hearing this story from Washington, D.C. Look, we had to give tax money to Wall Street and to Israel. And, it's not like we want you slaves thinking about the word independence anyway. That would be double plus ungood. If you really want to see things explode, join the Army. We'll let you play with high explosives all over the world, just not in your own backyard. And a reader wrote in to comment, all these military bases, they still have their own private golf courses. Go into Google Earth, look at the island of Oahu and all the military bases. They've got their own private golf courses. Those cost money. Could sell those off for condo development if you're running out of money. We're hearing this thing about, we don't have the money for fireworks for July 4th, but Obama can spend $100 million on his African trip. And on top of that, it's just been announced the Secret Service has commissioned a brand new presidential limousine for Obama, even bigger and more bomb-proof than the last one. It's going to weigh 7.5 tons. I guess they were embarrassed by the last one, couldn't actually get over the lip into driveways and got hung up. And it's got a refrigerator with the president's blood in the back, night vision, heavy armor, all of this stuff. Just in case you're wondering where the money that should have gone to fix your roads and schools and hospitals went to, Obama's got a new pimped-out ride that he's going to be tooling around here. And it's just a reminder of just how afraid he is of the American people to surround himself with that much armor. Something else I noticed about July 4th. Everyone was always talking July 4th sales, July 4th celebrations, July 4th. They don't use the word independence anymore. They don't want you to remember that word. It's almost like they want this holiday to kind of go away, so you're not thinking about the Declaration of Independence. You're not thinking about freedom and independence and revolution. Oh, no, that's double plus ungood here. And they did succeed in blocking all the fireworks here, even the illegals. I mean, they can't stop the illegal aliens from coming into this country. They certainly can't impede the flow of illegal drugs, but by golly, they shut down all those illegal fireworks. I wonder what that cost. No, you have to go to the government-approved fireworks show. Apparently, one of those government-approved fireworks shows in California injured 28 people. Maybe you ought to leave this stuff to the amateurs. We seem to do it a little bit safer. And I got a lot of emails from people who did go to the officially sanctioned government-approved fireworks shows and celebrations. They did not feel free. They felt like they were in a prisoner of war camp by the time they got crotch groped and bags looked at and told that they couldn't take coolers or anything else in there. Didn't feel like a celebration of freedom. Felt like a gulag. So we're going to take a break for commercials here. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the general reaction of the American people to July 4th because we're not allowed to say Independence Day anymore. And how there literally was this gulag feeling all across the country. We're having this story that came out of activistpost.com about all these warrantless checkpoints in operation. And one of the things they were doing is they were calling it a seatbelt checkpoint, and then as soon as you open the door to verify that you're wearing your seatbelt, the cops take that as permission to go through your car looking for contraband, looking for illegal things, looking for those sparklers of mass destruction here. And it's really absurd. We're getting a story here about how apparently an entire neighborhood in Las Vegas is now on lockdown. And I understand they're twitchy. They had these riots that broke out among these supporters of two Mexican soccer teams, and they weren't happy with the results of the game. And there was a big riot there, and they're twitchy. But apparently somebody heard something that sounded like gunshots on July 4th. You can see where I'm going with this. And the police showed up. They arrested somebody, did not find a gun. And now they have locked down an entire neighborhood on the theory that the gun that the police know must be there is in one of the houses. So they've literally gotten a search warrant from the district attorney for an entire neighborhood to look for the gun. How many of you think, like I do, that probably it was somebody who had a couple of illegal firecrackers who set them off, and the police overreacted? Just, I mean, complete nonsense. Now, there's another story, and this was over at From the Trenches World Report. The city of Belton has had a 4th of July parade for the last 164 years. Began in 1850. They've only taken a couple of breaks, so forth and so on. And every year, there is a color guard for the flag of the United States of America, and there's a group of Civil War reenactors who march in uniform and kit. This year, 2013, for the first time in the history of this parade, the color guard and the reenactors were told they were not allowed to carry their prop rifles. Supposedly because the insurance company says, oh, it's way too dangerous. These guns are not loaded. The government wants you to forget about independence. They want you to forget about the Bill of Rights. For the color guard for the American flag to be told not to have their guns. For these Civil War reenactors. Maybe they want the Civil War reenactors to go away, because they remind the country of a time when the southern states wanted to break away from an already tyrannical government that was taking taxes and not listening to them. They're literally, it's Orwell, right out of George Orwell. We don't use that I word any longer. We call it July 4th, and it's certainly a good phrase to put there on all the advertising for the shopping malls. We saw all of that. July 4th sale. You know, display your freedom to buy this latest round of junk on credit. But they don't want you thinking about independence and the Declaration and exactly why we are the United States of America and not a continuing colony of Great Britain. And for this idea that the color guard for the flag in a 4th of July parade was told they had to leave their unloaded guns at home. We don't want people seeing guns. We might give them ideas that guns are harmless, and we can't have that in the United States of America. We need people to wet themselves when they see a firearm, the way back in the 1950s they would wet themselves when they heard the word communist. It's part of the brainwashing. Gallup did a survey which found that 71% of Americans say the Founding Fathers would be disappointed in today's America. I think that's putting it lightly. I think the Founding Fathers would be absolutely in a rage that today, 2013, the American people find themselves back in the same tyranny they fought the revolution to be free of. By the way, I got a lot of positive response on the 3rd hour of Wednesday's show in my little discourse about the Declaration of Independence, why things were in it, and why we're back pretty much in that same situation of tyranny that we were in 1776. And so I excerpted that sound file. It's available as an MP3 on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com here. They want you to forget what July 4th is all about. They want to turn it into just another marketing holiday like Christmas. Forget about spirit and meaning. It's just another excuse to drive the herd down to the shopping malls and separate them from their money. July 4th, Independence Day, and I'm not going to stop using that word independence no matter how politically incorrect it is declared. July 4th is about the right to secede from a corrupt central government unfit to govern a free people. And we need to remember that. They're trying to erase it. I went out, I took a look at all the TV coverage of what was going on, And yes, the History Channel was running the thing about the American Revolution, about how heroic and brave we were, and yes, we were, but they don't talk about what caused the revolution. They never mentioned the Currency Act, never mentioned private central banking. They want you to celebrate the image of the revolution, but they don't want to remind you why it came into being, because we're back in that same situation all over again. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing fine.
I gotta say one thing happened last night. After the fireworks and all that stuff, I was working last night, and the police pulled over a driver, and the driver cashed his paycheck on Wednesday, July 3rd, because his business was closed for the next 4 days, and he had his whole paycheck in his pocket, and the cops stopped him and automatically assumed that he was selling drugs and wanted to steal his paycheck, confiscate his cash.
Yes.
And the thing is, the only thing that really stopped him was, number one, the driver saying, no, this is my hard-earned money, and all of a sudden, people started converging with their cameras.
Yeah, that's a good thing, but, you know, the cops are still out there. There are, in fact, one of the articles we were talking about these warrantless checkpoints over the 4th of July is talking about how the police are arresting and beating people taking pictures, even though the courts have repeatedly ruled that law-abiding citizens have a right to use their cameras and videos to document what the police are doing, because the police have no expectation of privacy if they're out in public working on the taxpayers' dollars. But the street cops are, you know, their attitude is, we're going to smash the camera, beat the person up, and if they let them go later on, hey, it's not my problem, because we're never punished for any of these things.
Well, the thing is, Joe, it's like more than a dozen people with cameras. So I don't think one cop could go up and beat up 13 people.
Yeah,
cameras.
That's why it is so important for everybody to have cameras. And again, you can now get cameras that are concealed inside pens, eyeglasses. There's that Luxie headset. I got one of those, and they're very, very good. Have to be handled gently, but they're very, very good. And the idea is we need to let the police of the United States know there are cameras out there, including cameras you don't know are there. And if that message goes out there, the cops are going to say, okay, we have to play by the rules. And we sort of push back on that whole situation. But you're absolutely right. This civil forfeiture thing has gone completely out of control. The police departments are being told, we don't have any tax money for you. It's all going to Israel and Wall Street and wars. You have to fund yourself off the people. It's literally return to pillage, keeping the army, meaning the police, in the field by looting the civil population. And that's what they're doing. And one of the reasons they're not out there fighting crimes is because they're out there too busy looking for civil forfeiture opportunities. I had a friend who used to own a gardening business, which is a cash and carry business, and he was on his way to a gardening show to buy new stock for his store, got stopped by the cops. They took his cash, took him 6 months through court to get half of it back, and by that time, of course, his business had gone out of business. And this is happening. It's epidemic all over the country. This was becoming a problem even back in the 1990s. Where if you have too much cash in your pocket, they'll take it from you and say it's up to you to prove that you were innocent. It's a return to the Napoleonic Code. The attitude is because they're confiscating property, your cars, your homes, your cash, whatever, that the normal civil protections accorded to citizens don't apply. They don't have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to prove that you came by that money in a government-approved fashion, like, I don't know, running cocaine for the CIA or something.
Well, but you know, the thing is, too, when I lived in Florida, I knew a guy who was a retired GM worker. He had a nice RV and all that stuff, and he went to the bank and withdrew $3,000 in cash to fuel his RV because he would go up to Alaska and fish and camp with his wife and enjoy the fruits of his labor. He never even made it to the end of town, only to find out that the bank teller turned him into the cops, and the reason why they got his all his property is because there was traces of cocaine on the cash he was carrying.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that before, and it is completely absurd. By the way, your bank tellers are, in fact, required to turn in a report if you pull too much money out of your bank in cash. It's not up to the bank teller. They're not being the bad people here. It is government policy. If you pull out $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 in cash from your bank, they have to make a report to the police because obviously nobody could have $8,000 in cash without nefarious intent. Like getting your money out of the bank ahead of a haircut is not considered a legitimate reason to have your money. And as far as that issue about cocaine, money circulates. I think somebody actually did a test and found out something like 80% of currency in circulation does carry traces of cocaine, and it doesn't mean the person currently holding the bill is guilty of drug use or drug dealing, but it makes a handy-dandy excuse for the cops to say, oh, we can grab that money, and the chief of police can have a newer car and air conditioning. It's pillage, and it is the sign of dictatorship. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And, of course, looking at the corporate media today, they're back to that all Zimmerman all the time, and they're going on and on. And I saw this article out there saying, this is really about America's acceptance of killing the black people. So they're already out there trying to fan the racial overtones of this. Now, earlier today, the prosecutor was literally badgering Trayvon's mother on the stand, basically trying to get her to say that his actions led to his own death. And that's a very dangerous and reckless thing to do when you are badgering the mother of the guy who died on the stand. You run the risk of alienating that jury. And it's rather alarming this lawyer would do that unless he's absolutely 100% confident that Zimmerman is going to get off one way or the other. Now, supposedly the prosecution was going to rest on Wednesday. They didn't. They're going to rest today, at which point the defense is going to move to simply dismiss the case before presenting the defense case, before going to the jury. I don't think the judge would go along with that. But, boy, if the judge did, we'd be off and running. And I'm just so alarmed by all of these articles I'm seeing all over about how this is all about race relations and there's going to be riots if Zimmerman gets off. And again, it smells of a classic COINTELPRO style provocation. And we saw this back during the Rodney King trial, where the judge in that case, they took these 4 officers up to Sylmar to get them away from those inner city neighborhoods. And the judge literally threw the case to the police officers by instructing the jury that unless they could all agree on the exact whack of a baton at which excessive force was being used, they had to acquit the police officers. And, of course, the jurors couldn't agree on which blow of the baton represented excessive force, and they let the cops go, and all these riots cranked up. And there were stories at that time that most of the fires were being set by this one group of people that was just going 3 blocks, set a fire, 3 blocks, set a fire, 3 blocks, set a fire, to fan up this huge riot that would allow the federal government to federalize the National Guard, take away direct control of the National Guard from the state governors, and various other ideas of continuing to turn whites against blacks in this country, so we're scrambling amongst ourselves and not paying attention to the real threat to the American way of life coming out of Washington, D.C. And so one more time, regardless of what happens in this Zimmerman trial, do not start rioting. That's exactly what the government wants. They would love to have some race riots in some cities that they could easily put down brutally as an example to all you pesky freedom-loving Americans. Declare a national emergency, suspend the Bill of Rights, justify a gun grab, in order to forestall a mass uprising of the entire American people they know they could not deal with, as was the case with Mubarak, and now apparently Morsi. The U.S. government wants a little revolution they can crush down in order to avoid the big revolution they know they would lose. So it just feels like a stunt. The media is giving way too much coverage to this murder trial. There's murders every day in this country. There's nothing unique about that. Why is this case being fanned so hard by the corporate media? Because they're fanning the racial overtones, and they're already out there saying, oh, this will lead to riots. We're seeing this flood of Facebook and Twitter posts about how we're going to go out and we're going to burn Whitey and all the rest of that stuff. Government's using a lot of their phony manufactured identities on these social networks to put out this stuff to get everybody to say, okay, Zimmerman let off, we have to riot. No, you don't, and you shouldn't, because it's what the government wants. to set American against American. So we do not stand up against a government that has just gone completely off the constitutional reservation. And remember, we were talking Wednesday about the Declaration of Independence, where they were talking about King George III doing exactly the same thing in the United States, setting American against American, to keep them divided, to keep them quarreling with each other in order to keep them controlled. Now, one positive note over yesterday's Independence Day holiday, there were somewhere around 100 separate protests in American cities protesting against the NSA spying, which is, of course, a complete violation of the Fourth Amendment. And so there were those protests all over the place. Zero coverage by the American corporate media, I might add. But they were out there saying it's time to restore the Fourth Amendment. It's time to restore the Bill of Rights. It's the Bill of Rights. It's not a bill of suggestions. It's not optional. That Constitution is the original contract with America, and either the government complies with the terms of that contract or they should resign. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. That mixer is on its last legs. I need to buy a new one of those here. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I hurled the defy at the NSA regarding the idea of personal codes and encryptions. And the point of the exercise was to show that this NSA spying on all of us really doesn't have anything to do with criminals and terrorists and Wall Street CEOs, all of whom already know not to use online social media or email or anything in the clear because it's being monitored. Because we've actually known all this is going on back to the echelon system of the 1980s. And then anybody who really is engaged in nefarious behavior developed their own code systems. And so I decided to show how easy it was, and I posted an encrypted message, and I said, okay, NSA, let's see if you're really as good at finding criminals and terrorists as you claim you are. The scenario was that on the 4th of July, me and my fellow irritists, because I'm not a terrorist, I'm annoying, obnoxious, and irritating, but I'm not a terrorist, we were going to pelt some building with marshmallows of mass destruction. And the encrypted message contained the location of the target. And yesterday came and went. Nobody broke the encrypted message. And according to the server logs, a lot of people downloaded it and tried. And so yesterday I posted the code, which means it's now completely useless because the NSA knows what I was doing. And the whole point of the exercise was to get the message out. It is possible to protect your personal business data from a government with a long history of stealing citizens' personal business data for private gain. And to underscore the fact, all of this NSA spying on you, the American people, has nothing at all to do with crime and preventing terror. It's just about keeping an eye on you by a government that's gone totally paranoid. Because they understand, we the American people have finally realized this government is not what was intended for the United States of America. We have a criminal, illegal, illegitimate government that is trying to perpetuate its power and wealth by just watching every single thing that you do. And the first step in evading that surveillance, that looting of your business secrets, like the FBI and CIA were caught doing at the Seattle APEC, is to know it's possible and not all that difficult. And that was the whole point of this exercise. You can hide your data. If you've got a little programming skills and you just come up with a method that is not one of the standard accepted encryption systems, you can protect your data quite easily, as a matter of fact. So, anyway. Now, getting back to this whole exposure of the NSA spying, and now the NSA is trying to use the, hey, they all do it, excuse by pointing to France, which apparently has a similar system in place to keep an eye on their people. But the political fallout continues. This has been a tremendous blow to the legitimacy and credibility of the United States government as any kind of a moral leader supportive of human rights around the globe. Obviously, they're not. It is not supporting human rights to be peeking in at the little sexy text messages husbands and wives trade with each other. not human rights at all. Even the United Nations is saying this is a human rights violation by the United States government against the American people and against the people of the world. Now, Europe is trying to engage with the United States government over this whole spying thing because it's caused a huge political upset. And Great Britain is now saying there should be no talks between the U.S. and Europe, and we know why. It's come out that Great Britain was part of this network, and they have been going all the way back to the Echelon days, and they don't want their spying on their people to be dragged out. Even Snowden was saying GCHQ in Britain is actually worse than the NSA here in the United States of America. And so Great Britain is trying to shut down the possibility of any talks because they're worried about the possibility of more exposure. Meanwhile, the European Union Parliament has voted to scrap a proposed U.S. data sharing deal until Washington comes clean on just how pervasive their spying on Europeans has been. This resolution passed 483 to 98 with 65 abstentions. That's a major, major, overwhelming landslide. People of the world are very angry at this whole situation. Now, let's get back to where's Snowden. And by the way, I note with some alarm that Huffington Post is very much on the bash Snowden bandwagon. Oh, he's evil, he's bad, he never should have done this, from which we may deduce that Huffington Post is perfectly okay with the government spying on everything that you do. For all we know, Huffington Post is keeping the IP address of everybody who visits their website and sending it over to the government. So they've got a list of people who are trying to question what the government is doing. Venezuela is considering asylum for Snowden. As we mentioned on Wednesday, Iceland is considering a bill right now that would grant Snowden immediate citizenship. Of course, getting from Moscow to someplace else may be a little bit tricky because the United States government is throwing their weight around. They're going to get Snowden one way or the other, maybe even a drone strike. And there's still a huge political fallout over the diversion and search of the private aircraft of the president of Bolivia. And there's one article about this over at The Guardian, basically saying that the involved nations that blocked the plane and forced it to land to be searched were told that Snowden was on the plane. The foreign minister, Jose Manuel Garcia Margallo, said on Spanish national television, they were told Snowden is on the plane. The minister refused to say who told them Snowden was on the plane. And it doesn't really matter because we have this article over at diepress.com saying, yeah, it was the United States calling up all these countries and saying, we know Snowden is on the plane, and yes, it's the plane being used by the head of a sovereign nation, but we, the United States, demand that you put it on the ground so we can get Snowden. And, of course, it's a huge embarrassment because Snowden wasn't on there. Which is another reminder, the NSA, for all these billions and billions of dollars they have spent constructing this spy network to keep an eye on you, they can't find or track somebody who wants to be hidden from the grid. Now, from the point of view of Bolivia, this forcing down of this airplane to be searched of a head of state was an act of international air piracy. Can you imagine the aircraft of the president of France being forced down in Latin America on suspicion, unfounded, that it was carrying a political refugee? There's such a thing as the diplomatic pouch and diplomatic immunity. You're not supposed to do that kind of thing. Can you imagine the sheer fury we would hear from the U.S. government if any nation dared interfere with Air Force One flying around the world? Bolivia is now going to close their U.S. embassy. The rage is spreading all across South America. This is a major foreign policy disaster to have tried something this heavy-handed. And maybe if they'd found Snowden, the political damage could be contained, but they didn't. It's a huge embarrassment here. But the United States government, which apparently high on their antidepressants, is unable to learn from their mistakes, is still throwing their weight around. They have demanded that the government of Ireland arrest Edward Snowden should he land at the Shannon Airport on his way potentially to Cuba. And the Irish government is giving this polite, we'll consider it, but so far have made no commitments one way or the other. The U.S. government is causing more damage to its international reputation with this heavy-handed approach to getting Snowden than Snowden himself actually did. And now that everybody's alerted, now that we all know we're being watched on, experts are looking into everything. And every picture you take with a modern digital camera that has a GPS in it, like your smartphone, it saves the GPS location. It saves all that information. The iPhone does that, with one exception. That little screenshot where you can save the current state of the iPhone screen is saved as a PNG that doesn't have any EXIF data. So if you want to take a picture that doesn't give away its location or its time or anything, just frame it in the camera, then hit screenshot and save that. The U.S. Postal Service is now officially admitting that, yes, they're snooping on your mail. They are not actually, to anybody's knowledge, reading paper letters. We do know they X-ray packages to make sure you're not sending something you ought not to be, and they scan all mail processed nationwide in order to be able to track a piece of mail from where you drop it in the postal box to its destination. And of course that system doesn't really work because all they get is the postal box. If you're not, of course, if you're sending it from your own home mailbox, that's another situation. But all of these programs, they've got serious flaws that undermine their actual usefulness. We're going to grab a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Hope you enjoyed your false flag-free Independence Day.
Yeah, it was a quiet day on several fronts, and yeah, I'm glad there wasn't a false flag. But again, I think the focus right now is on the Zimmerman case.
Yeah, well, and the next thing is, of course, it's for Egypt, it's the less Morsi, the merrier. And and the next thing, of course, is this diplomatic kerfuffle over the downing of Morales' plane. I mean, the plane is a diplomatic bag and should not be opened, searched, or done anything with. I mean, from my perspective, it would serve the South Americans well to literally confiscate all EU assets, all EU corporate assets, all US assets, all US corporate assets, confiscate them in South America. Just take charge. Say, right, you've just gone too far.
Well, you know, that's what Hugo Chavez was doing, which is why they wanted him out of there. But it's one thing for the United States to covert overthrow one country at a time, but when all of the provinces of the American empire are in rebellion at the same time, that is a major, major headache. And you're absolutely right. The entire aircraft of a head of state is considered a diplomatic pouch. And they had absolutely no grounds to force it down, even if Snowden had been on board. It's an egregious violation of the international rules of diplomacy. And yet the U.S. is still out there screaming at Ireland, you'll give us Snowden, give us Snowden. And they're foaming at the mouth and throwing a tantrum, and they're just making themselves look worse. You know,
absolutely, Mike. And what I've heard through the grapevine is that one of the larger opposition parties in Iceland is now promoting the idea that that Iceland should issue a passport, an Icelandic passport to Snowden, but not just an Icelandic passport, a diplomatic passport.
Ah, that gets even better there, because then nobody could touch him, not even over in Shannon Airport. Legally, of course, at this point we know the U.S. government cares not for either domestic or international law here. But that's a very interesting development there. And, you know, here's another example of how the United States shot itself in the foot. When they revoked Snowden's passport and basically said, we're revoking his American citizenship, they made Snowden a stateless person under the jurisdiction of international laws regarding refugees, which actually allows Snowden even more freedom from interference as he travels around.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm hoping these. Well, it seems that every move that this administration makes, it just makes an absolute mess of it.
They absolutely are. They're totally reactive. They're totally defensive. They've lost the initiative in this narrative, and they're just showing the world that they're bluff and bluster and threatening, and you know that's not what a leader of a free world is supposed to be acting like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've listened to Obama's various pronouncements on the Egyptian military takeover and arrest of Morsi, and it makes no sense considering how he was elected. I mean, from my perspective, in fact, the American election is what you would call fraudulent in every sense of the word.
With a capital F.
This is my definition of an American election, and please don't take offense. It's an opinion poll of people that do not count. Now, I'm going to qualify that because you've forgotten as soon as you voted, so I'll start again. It's an opinion poll of people who do not count for Israeli first candidates with large bribery accounts on diebold machines designed to miscount. These diebold results are sent to the Electoral College that should not count, who select the Zionist Wall Street stooge of no account to form a government not held to account. And that seems to be the whole principle of this American system.
You got it, but you left out one important facility. These results from these diebold machines don't go to the Electoral College. They go to the Voters' News Service, which is a privately owned company owned by the TV networks and a couple of major newspapers that already has been caught engaging in fraud before. And all these votes go into this big black box of the Voters' News Service. There's no civilian oversight whatsoever. And then Voters' News Service announces who the winners are, and that's what gets sent to the Electoral College.
Well, Mr. Obama, your president, having gone through this system, really does have some testicular tissue and effrontery to criticize Egypt.
Oh, well, we've seen that kind of hypocrisy for years and years and years where, you know, they're out there screaming about Assad is using chemical weapons on his people like the U.S. government didn't do exactly the same thing down at that church in Waco, Texas.
Yeah, and it appears to me that the real U.S. government is in Tel Aviv, and they control and orchestrate the Federal Reserve, the Pentagon, the NSA, CIA, FBI, the bankers, and Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, this whole system, whatever you can say about it, it doesn't resemble anything of democratic principles. It's entirely coincident that it does resemble that, and I'm sure
the only way
will be rectified.
The only way
rectified before.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. The only way the United States represents a republic with democratically elected leadership is in the advertising and propaganda. It's certainly not real world. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, John. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, with the revelation of massive spying through, well, your cell phones, corporations are now figuring, oh, the secret's out, let's make some money off of it. And now AT&T is saying that they're looking at a plan to sell their customers' wireless and Wi-Fi locations, their website browsing habits, mobile app usage, and other information to companies who are going to be interested in it. Mostly marketing companies. If you're hanging around a lot of bookstores, you will suddenly be flooded with all kinds of email ads for bookstores. If you hang around the racetrack, you're going to get all kinds of auto ads, targeted advertising, and yes, it's a benign use of the information they're collecting, but again, they're collecting it without your permission. There's no way to opt out of this total corporate surveillance on your life. It's just epidemic, and the attitude among corporations, including Huffington Post, is that, yeah, this is cool. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to be afraid of. And, of course, that's complete nonsense. There's a principle here that your private life is private. And somebody, whether it's a corporation or a government, needs a really good reason to intrude on you. And the best reason of all, again, goes back to the track record of people inside the U.S. government and corporations stealing your personal business secrets with which to make profit on. If you look at government, how it guards its privacy. Corporations guard their privacy. Citizens have a right to the same degree of privacy. That's the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. You can't have a double standard where Obama and his White House can have all this secrecy and privacy, and corporations can have privacy into their lab results on GMO testing, but you, the American people, are not allowed to have privacy? That's nonsense. That's un-American. That's Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and Stasi thinking. That citizens are not deserving of protection of their personal business secrets from predatory government agents. Now, you're probably aware that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection agencies have predator drones to fly over the border to make sure that those illegal aliens aren't stumbling and getting hurt as they flood on into the U.S. job market. But apparently, documents have surfaced as the result of Freedom of Information Act by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. There's a group that's definitely worth your support right now, where the U.S. Customs and Border Protection are lending their predator drones to federal, state, and local agencies for domestic surveillance, and this is the really bad part, non-lethal strikes. In other words, these predator drones over the United States of America are armed with tear gas, with tasers, and they're deploying them against you. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. European Union lawmakers have ordered an investigation into U.S. spying. Gee, you think here. But I'll tell you where the real hit is going to come from. All these companies in the United States who went along with the NSA spying are going to take it financially, because all across Europe we are hearing about companies that are going to quit using U.S. internet providers, in particular the cloud. Everyone was being sold the cloud. You have access to huge amounts of storage and huge amounts of processing power. It's all scalable. It's cool. You need to be there. And as soon as the cloud came out, remember we were talking on the show, you don't want to put anything on that cloud that you need to keep secret, because it's wide open to government spying, and ta-da! Yeah, it is. Anyone using the cloud for any important data, like your new chili recipe or your new plant food that you've discovered that makes the plants grow bigger, if you put that on the cloud, some corporation or some government is going to have it to market before you can get there. If you're using the cloud, you are an idiot. Absolutely, you are an idiot, because it's all wide open. And so now we're seeing all these European companies are saying they're going to disconnect from the cloud and go back to standalone data centers and standalone processors, and you should too. All right, we've talked enough about NSA Gate and Snowden. Oh, and by the way, latest word from Iceland is they're not going to vote on his citizenship until after the summer recess. It's being reported as Iceland has declined his citizenship. That's not true. The headlines are misleading. All the Parliament did was say they're not going to have the debate and the vote until after the summer recess here. Let's see. Interesting little story out of 12160.info, how the IRS made all kinds of groups' lives miserable. Actually, the IRS has made us all miserable. And we know it's another fraud. It's another complete fraud. For over 10 years, tax rights, citizens' rights groups have hurled a challenge at the Internal Revenue Service. Prove to us the 16th Amendment to the Constitution was actually ratified by the necessary three-quarter states. And they can't do it. They act like it's not an issue. If you bring it up in court, you know, you're hit with a huge fine. The judge says, oh, it's a trivial piece of nonsense. How dare you bring this garbage into my court? Because those courts and those judges are all funded by tax revenues. It's a conflict of interest, with one notable exception, of course, and that's Judge James C. Fox, in the case Sullivan versus United States. And it had nothing to do with taxes and tax laws, but it had to do with whether or not laws were valid. And Judge James C. Fox admitted right in the court record that on examination, the 16th Amendment failed ratification. But the money junkie said, oh, come on, yeah, we'll make a lot of money. Those dumb Americans, they'll never check up on us. But we did. Now, turning on over to Egypt. Egypt has now closed the Gaza border. There have been attacks by quote-unquote unknown gunmen against some of those checkpoints. We know the Egyptian army deployed tanks to that area. And I think the concern is that Egypt might see the current turmoil, or rather Israel might see the current turmoil in Egypt as an opportunity to retake the Sinai. And we know yesterday Israel was bombing Gaza City. Now we're seeing all this fighting along the Gaza border. The Egyptian military has declared a state of emergency on that part of the Sinai. So I think Israel is lusting for the Sinai. The Egyptian army knows they're doing it, and they're trying to forestall that. Going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about what's going on in Egypt, and apparently the Muslim Brotherhood and Morsi supporters are pushing back, so the violence, sadly, is not over yet in Egypt. And there's an interesting article that came out of Global Research up in Canada. Washington's Islamist strategy in crisis as Morsi toppled. Egypt protests directed against the United States. And what's going on here is when the Arab Spring first erupted, the U.S. adopted a policy of trying to hijack it in order to bring about regime change, to make sure that the new rulers coming in were going to be acceptable to American and Israeli interests. And that appears to have backflashed rather severely. The agenda in Egypt was force Morsi out, have elections which would have a slate of U.S. and Israeli-approved candidates, and all would be well. But with the wild card of the military taking over and a very obvious groundswell of popular opposition in Egypt to the United States and Israel, it doesn't look like we're going to wind up with an Egypt that is friendlier to the U.S. and Israel than had they simply left well enough alone. Another story out of RINF.com, where a senior Iranian clergyman is saying what brought Morsi down was lining up with U.S. and Israeli agendas, especially with regards to Syria. And we know there was this little covert attempt at an overthrow for a while inside Egypt. It was just a few hundred people, agent provocateurs. But apparently it was when Morsi was photographed with hardline Islamists calling for holy war in Syria against Assad, that was when the Egyptian people stood up and said, enough is enough. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And it's a reminder, the very worst mistake a revolutionary government can do is think they can go back to the same policies and practices of their predecessor government. And that's what Morsi did. He came in showing some spine relative to the U.S. and Israel, but over time, and all this money coming in from the U.S., your tax money sent into Egypt to basically buy Morsi to the U.S. position, and he bought it, he drank the Kool-Aid, and now the Egyptian people are standing up and saying they want their own leadership that is not listening to the United States or Israel. In fact, there's an article to that effect again over in RINF.com. Egypt must throw off the Zionist yoke. Now, as we mentioned, as soon as Morsi was out, the U.S. government threw a tantrum. We had Senator Patrick Leahy and Obama saying that all financial support from the United States to Egypt is cut off. How dare you throw out our puppet ruler? Same tantrum they threw back in 1979 with regards to Iran. And Israel is saying, look, if you stop giving them money, you can't control them any longer. Because the only nation on earth that the U.S. government pours tons of money onto without expecting any obedience is Israel. And Israel is now worried that any new incoming government is not going to abide by the Israel-Egypt peace treaty. Of course, if Israel does invade the Sinai, that treaty's out the window anyway. But I think the lesson taken away from the situation in Egypt right now is they should have left well enough alone, because it's backflashing on them. Let's see here. Getting back to that situation along the Gaza border, 5 military checkpoints attacked. 1 soldier is dead. And again, it looks to me like Israel is at least considering a possibility of grabbing a chunk of the Sinai while Egypt is dealing with internal turmoil. Egypt's army has declared a state of emergency in Suez and South Sinai. They know that that Suez Canal is a major prize that Israel would love to take control of. Meanwhile, up in Syria, the battle is continuing there. Fresh mortar attacks on Damascus and Aleppo by the hired mercenaries, who are openly now engaging in a campaign of terror. You either support us or we will kill you all, which again underscores it's not a genuine popular revolution. Because again, can you imagine George Washington and Thomas Jefferson trying to kick the British government out of this nation by going around and burning down schools and churches and killing colonials? The British played that game, especially down in the Carolinas, creating loyalist militias to send against the Patriot militias. So they didn't want to risk, you know, those British soldiers in their handsome red jackets. But it's not real. Not when the so-called revolutionaries are threatening the civilian population. It's not a real revolution any longer. By the way, little comment, and I mentioned this, I think, briefly on Wednesday, but I want to come back to it. There's this wonderful video and photos of this Egyptian helicopter flying over Tahrir Square. Apparently, they're putting on air shows now with smoke trails, and it's just a big party. And they have this photo of this helicopter just flying low over the crowd, and it is being painted with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of handheld laser pointers, including those blue ones, which are even more powerful than the green ones. Nothing happened to the helicopter. Didn't change course, didn't crash. Pilot didn't get out of the helicopter with a seeing eye dog. The American media is trying to say, oh, it was a danger, it was a risk. Obviously not. Which means, as we have already pointed out on this radio show many times before, this screeching about laser pointers was yet another totally bogus crisis dreamed up by the government to make busy work for TSA, Department of Homeland Security, and the customs workers, who actually did confiscate a small laser I ordered from China for a physics experiment. This government is great at dealing with crises they invent. Oh, laser pointers are a problem. We must take action and spend tax dollars making sure that Americans don't have these dangerous laser pointers. And the Egyptians just proved they're not dangerous. There were hundreds of these laser beams on that helicopter. It was actually kind of pretty. And the helicopter did not fall out of the sky. It's like human-caused global warming. There's no actual foundation for the claim that a handheld laser pointer can be used to bring down an aircraft. It's another created out of thin air crisis for the U.S. government to sell you a solution to. Whoever it is who came up with this idea that handheld laser pointers are a threat, probably the same moron who decided mothers could not carry bottles of their own breast milk onto aircraft to feed their babies. It's just another way to harass and humiliate Americans. People have been thrown into jail for pointing lasers into the sky. And what happened in Egypt with that helicopter proves they were jailed for nothing at all, other than to give the government another piece of propaganda about how they're protecting us. They're protecting us from the scourge of laser pointers. Look at how that's burning a hole in my poster back there. Here, blah, blah, blah. You know, they're harmless. They really are. And the Egyptians just proved it. Our government can't actually handle a real crisis. Like Fukushima, Gulf of Mexico, the economy. The only crises they can fix are the ones they create themselves to wave at us. Ooh, laser pointers, be afraid, but we'll solve that problem for you. It's nonsense. We, the people, demand the return of our lasers. I already have my replacement for my physics experiment. It's the principle involved. Second, we, the people, demand an admission the government were being clueless morons, again, about this laser threat. We demand the immediate release of everyone arrested for laser pointers of mass destruction and a public apology from the government for being that incredibly idiotic. Go forth and stupid no more. Of course they won't. This government never admits error, no matter how completely boneheaded they are. Our best information at the time was that hand-pointed lasers could slice a 747 in half even quicker than a U.S. Navy test missile. Meanwhile, down in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the investigation into the bombing of the Jewish Community Center in 1994 is proceeding, and attention continues to focus on the ex-Interior Minister of Argentina. Follow the money. The money that was paid to support this bombing tracks back to Carlos Vladimir Korax. And yes, he's Jewish. Remember how back when Argentina and Iran announced they were going to conduct their own investigation into the bombing, and Israel went ballistic and the U.S. went ballistic? How dare you challenge the fact that Iran did this? How dare you even question? Well, the investigation is underway, and again, it is not Iran. It's another classic false flag. The money trail. Follow the money goes back to this Jewish ex-interior minister. They're investigating him. They're focusing on him. And we're already seeing a propaganda effort out there to try and somehow convince Argentina and Iran to not really issue a final report. Really, it's just going to cause all kinds of problems. We'll hit you with even more sanctions if you dare mention this was another Israeli false flag. They're pulling in all their political punches. No doubt the United States will go to the United Nations and try and find some way to pressure Argentina to bury this, but the damage is already done. We know Israel survives on the false flag attack. USS Liberty, Lavon affair, USS Cole, 9/11. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Werner in Canada. Aloha, Werner. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mike, or good morning in your neck of the woods.
Yes.
I just turned in there, and you mentioned there about laser pointers. Laser is a tool, is a device, and any kind of a device can be used for good and for bad. With the laser pointer, there can be serious harm can be done to people, to...
Well, Werner, you need to understand that the term laser pointer does not mean it's actually a laser. Laser stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, and the original lasers were made out of objects like ruby rods that were polished parallel on the ends and given mirrored coatings, or gas discharge lasers like helium neon, and the way they worked is the light would bounce back and forth several times, actually thousands of times, millions of times, before it exited the laser. And those kinds of devices do produce a truly coherent light beam that doesn't really spread very much at all over long distances. Now these lasers... now let me finish here. Okay, Werner. These handheld laser pointers, it's actually a laser, it's a diode that produces a monochromatic light. If you take the little focusing lens off the front, you will see that the light is coming out, fanning out quite wide. It is not a focused, coherent beam, so it's not a true laser in the physics sense of the word. And even with that lens, these beams do spread out quite a bit over a short distance. In fact, one of the lasers I was considering for my physics experiment, over a space of just a mile, it fanned out to over 100 yards wide. And that's not the way a true laser works. So when you're talking about...
No, I understand that. When I first heard about lasers, they said, for example, when they beam it the distance, 100,000 miles, the distance to the moon, it will just only spread out in roughly about 300 yards or 300 feet or 300 yard wide beam.
Yes.
So it got very, very little spread. But as I say, with those directional lasers, or even with this highly intensified light, you know, with the focusing lens in front, I've seen the severe damage being done to animals. Animals were being blinded.
Okay, well, yes, if you have one of these higher-powered laser pointers and you point it into an eye, you can cause damage, but that's not the context of the reason the laser pointers are being taken away from Americans. The claim was, Werner, we're going to let you go here so I can get my thought out here. The claim was that a person on the ground could shine a laser pointer at an aircraft in flight and potentially crash the airplane by blinding the pilot. And the beam is not that strong, and by the time it reaches the altitude of the aircraft, it is already spread out to a point where the pilot can see the light, but it's no longer intense enough to cause eye damage. It is complete nonsense. And this pictures and video of this helicopter. Plus, you need to remember something. For those of you who are pilots sitting in a cockpit, you don't have a real good view of the ground. You've got the instrument panel up there, and you're watching your instruments. And you have to sort of hunch up to look at the runway when you're landing. You certainly don't see directly below you. So in addition to that vertical altitude distance, in order to have a view of the pilot's eyes, you've got to be several miles downrange. It's nonsense. And it was just another fanned-up, out-of-thin-air crisis that the government could sell you a solution to and prove how authoritative they were by taking your laser pointers away. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we do have one more phone call. Kent in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I have one comment about those lasers. I think it was Wednesday when the news broke that the change had taken place in Egypt. I tuned into, it was either Russia Today or the Voice of Russia television service. I don't know which, but they were live broadcasting from Tahrir Square from a camera mounted up, obviously at some distance, in a panoramic view, and they were waving it. And when that laser would hit the screen, hit the camera, the whole screen would just go blank. And I can see now, if you're coming in trying to land an airplane, that could be very, very disturbing.
Oh, come on. All right. First of all, all right, I've had enough of this, okay? Now, TV cameras, including the CCD ones, are designed to be pointed right at the sun and not burn themselves out, like they did with the camera they took to the moon on Apollo 12 here. And so when there's too much brightness coming in, the circuitry shuts off. The camera is not destroyed. It'll start working again as soon as the laser beam is out of that. And those lasers that you're seeing in Tahrir Square, and you can tell this from the very mechanical way in which they're moving around, those are not handheld. If you look at the walls around the buildings, they've got those laser display units that are drawing pictures and words. And those are far more powerful than the handheld laser pointers. This is junk. The government did to have one more reason to harass you and take things from you. I've worked with real lasers. I've worked with these laser pointers. The idea that you could crash an airplane with one is absolute junk. It's no more real than human-caused global warming. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm getting a bunch of emails from people saying, yeah, the government has just declared all these completely benign, harmless things to be weapons that must be searched for and confiscated. And somebody in the chat room is saying they took one of these little tiny keychain Swiss Army knives off of him because, you know, he might disassemble the plane in flight. And I remember, just to show how completely ludicrous all of this stuff is, right after 9/11, I got invited to be a speaker at a media event in Toronto, Canada. And obviously, post 9/11, the airports were a complete zoo, and they were, you know, searching everything. And they found a jeweler's screwdriver in my camera bag, about maybe 3 inches long, which I used to tighten this collar on a lens that keeps working loose. And they confiscated it as a danger. That screwdriver could be used for a nefarious purpose. Well, yeah, so could your breath. And then we get on the airplane, and the in-flight meal is a steak dinner served with a steel steak knife. Good thinking there. Good thinking here. Now, getting on over to Israel. Do you remember Israel's whole justification for taking Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land, and it sounded very poetic, but the reality is, yeah, there were people there. Been there for 1,000 years. And apparently over in eastern Jerusalem, during some construction work, they found yet another mass grave full of those people that Israel said didn't exist on the land before they showed up. So the grave has been dated back to the 1948 war that created Israel. It's another mass grave that shows up, but you're not supposed to talk about that, or you're one of those Hitler-loving, filthy anti-Semites. As I mentioned before, Israel is taking advantage of the turmoil in Egypt as a media distraction. They are escalating their raids on Palestinians in the West Bank. And apparently Israeli soldiers killed Moataz Sharawana, a Palestinian youth, by running him over with a military jeep. Interesting little story that we saw over at almonitor.com. EU loses patience with Israel. My first reaction is, haven't we all? Going to take a phone call here. Shannon in Tennessee. Aloha, Shannon. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Wanted to change the subject a little bit. Hey, could you go into a little more depth about the article that you linked to the YouTube video about the Tennessee cop with the guy at the roadside checkpoint? Could you go into that? And I'll just take my answer off the air.
Well, there isn't much more to go in. It was another example of how the police are basically feeling that they can simply harass and intimidate Americans. And I guess it's the result of all these Israeli companies that are being hired to train civil police forces in this country, where their whole attitude is intimidation and oppression, and they're not playing by the rules to protect the American people from this kind of behavior. And again, we get back to this attitude of citizens taking pictures or video of the police doing what they're doing. The police don't like it, and they continue to basically arrest people with cameras for obstruction of justice, which is kind of ironic because we're there to make sure justice is being served by holding the police to the rules under which they're supposed to operate. And we're seeing more and more examples of these. Apparently those the police officers who shot that dog earlier in this week, huge stink. All the animal rights groups are out there saying there was no reason to shoot this dog. The dog was not in a threatening posture. He was wagging his tail. He just wanted to be near his owner, and the cops just shot the dog once, let him lie in the street writhing and twitching in pain. Didn't even think to maybe put him out of his misery. Now then, talk about the economy a little bit here before Claire shows up. We're looking at a new jobs report that is being presented as an improvement to the job situation in this country. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. But of course what's important is what is not being said. And that is because of Obamacare, full-time jobs plunged by 250,000 on this latest jobs report. The job increase was on part-time jobs, surging to an all-time high by employers who don't want to have to pay Obamacare, and they're letting their full-time workers go and hiring 2 part-time workers to take their place. And so on paper, a job is a job is a job, even if it's only for a couple of hours a day, and they're counting it that way. But the full-time jobs Americans need to meet their mortgage payments, to pay their taxes, to pay their credit cards, to pay their student loans, dropped by 240,000. And for every one full-time job that is taken away, it stands to reason there are 2, 3 part-time jobs replacing it. So even the increase in part-time jobs doesn't really significantly indicate anything about the state of the economy. It's all just numbers. And this Obamacare is turning into a disaster, which is why now he's put off implementing part of it until after the midterm elections next year, because he understands this is going to significantly influence voters as if he thinks we won't be thinking about Obamacare before the election just because we're not actually having to fill out the paperwork and pay the price. Or maybe he knows it's actually even more expensive than we're already aware. Story out of 12160.info. The European Union government in Brussels is now saying that they've caught the banks rigging the 10 trillion euro derivatives market. There's that word again, those derivatives. That is a nuclear bomb wired to the major financial centers in London, Brussels, and Wall Street. And you would think they'd be looking at some way of sort of getting that risk under control. But no, they're out there, they're still selling derivatives. And they're rigging them because it makes huge amounts of money right now. And if it blows up 6 months from now, hey, it doesn't matter. The money junkies are going to be off in the Cayman Islands playing canasta with Ken Lay and just laughing themselves silly at how easy it was for them to make so much money without returning anything of value to society. Very interesting article. This is in Blacklisted News. Actually, I saw this a lot of different places. Asking the question, if the central banks have lost control of the bond market, which is a big part of their financial dealings, saying that even if there is no tapering, even if the Federal Reserve continues or even accelerates quantitative easing, the bond bubble could explode. Probably will. We know the U.S. Treasury's been issuing Treasury bonds like crazy. There's a Treasury bond bubble. And at this point, they may have lost complete control of that situation, and it's only a matter of time before that implodes. Student loan bubble is about ready to implode. Wall Streeters love bubbles because when it's blowing up, they can make tons of money. And they get out before it bursts and laugh themselves silly, all the way to wherever it is they're stashing their money in the tax-free havens. And it's causing immense destruction to ordinary people around the world. And the governments aren't concerned because they're all money junkies. They're getting campaign donations and other reinforcements from the money junkies to allow the money junkies to continue their games, up to and including wars. Make sure the world stays enslaved to those private central banks. Gosh darn that Gaddafi, he tried to have a state central bank, had to go. Gosh darn that Putin for taking control of their central bank, he's got to go. We got to figure out some way to sell war with Russia to the American people. Starting to look like the currency wars are coming back. The Bank of England and the European Central Bank are basically saying, we're going to go on doing what we've been doing all along. May not be working for the people, but hey, it works for us, and that's good enough. And these European statements sound like the currency wars are coming back here. Another reminder, this is from webofdebt.wordpress.org. The European Union finance ministers have agreed on a policy for depositor bail-ins to keep the banks capitalized, robbing the bank's own depositors to protect the bank, because apparently, in the view of every government enslaved to a private central bank, that private central bank, brick, mortar, ink, and paper, is far more important than human beings. I kind of like the idea of a government that sees human beings as of paramount importance. And if banks are going to fail through their own greed, recklessness, and stupidity, they ought to fail and make way for new banks with better fiscal sense. But under our current system, we, the taxpayers, are being enforced to incentivize corrupt, criminal, fraudulent behavior. And what happened in Cyprus is now set as policy for all of Europe. We know the fiscal plan for next year in Canada includes a bail-in provision. It will be coming here to the United States of America. This idea that banks, because of their reckless, high-risk investing, their gambling addiction, every time they hit gambler's ruin, they'll just turn around and say, well, we're going to take money from the people, because that's all they're here for, is to take money from. Everybody's getting this bailout fever. The Vatican is asking the Brazilian government to bail out the shortfall funding the Pope's visit to Rio. Apparently the Vatican spent more money than they'd set aside, and they're asking Brazil's government for a taxpayer-funded £26 million bailout to cover the shortfall for the Pope's upcoming visit here. Now let's talk about the gun grabbers who are out there. And again, the absolute shameful story that we reported at the top of the show, where this town has had a 4th of July parade going back to 1850. And this year, for the first time, the color guard for the flag and the Civil War reenactors who march in the parade every year were told they could not bring their weapons, even though the weapons were unloaded and rendered safe. They don't want you even looking at guns anymore. They want guns to become this mystical, evil thing that's out there someplace, but you've never seen one, let alone know how to touch one, or use one, or safely clear one, if you should find one lying in the alley following one of these drug crimes. You know, pick up, oh, what is it? It's a gun. Really? How do you know? Well, it says property of Fast and Furious on the side. Story out of 12160. Apparently, there is legislation that is being pushed to control ammunition using the phrase armor piercing. And the danger here is that this legislation does not actually define what they mean by armor piercing. Virtually all rifle ammunition is armor piercing, depending upon what you define as armor. If you have a vest made out of tin cans, lightweight rifle ammunition will go right through that. And it's seen as another way of trying to cut off the supply of ammunition to the law-abiding American people, even as the Department of Homeland Security is buying all this hollow point ammunition and AR-15s for government agencies. But when the government buys them, you know, they are personal defense firearms. When you buy them, it's an assault rifle, which is not true. Assault rifles are fully automatic. Those are already illegal here. Charles Krauthammer came out with an article that echoes a sentiment I made earlier in the week, where with all these problems that Obama is facing, stagnating economy, Syria erupting, Turkey erupting, Egypt erupting, all these gates lapping at the feet of the administration, IRS gate, DOJ gate, EPA gate, NSA gate, Prism gate, Gate, Floodgate, China and Russia mocking the United States of America, this issue over the forcing down of the Bolivian president's airplane, creating a diplomatic crisis around the globe. What does President Obama do? He goes back to climate change. We have to fight climate change. Pay no attention to all this other stuff. We have to fight climate change. On a recent poll of Americans' concerns, 21 areas of concern conducted by the Pew Research Organization, climate change was at the very, very bottom. The American people understand human-caused global warming was made up out of thin air like dangerous laser pointers. We've had several hard winters in a row that completely destroyed the credibility of the carbon Nazis screaming that snow would be a thing of the past. And Obama is desperate for distraction, and he wants his carbon tax. Even with all the taxes they're throwing at us with Obamacare, it's still not enough. They want to tax carbon dioxide. And the reality is very different. North Pole temperatures have been below the normal for this time of year every day for the last 3 months. The Arctic ice extent is setting new records. And we're just into the month of July. This is the longest period on record without a June hurricane in the U.S. for the last 27 years. And that was a mainstay of the global warming people, that, oh, global warming leads to more and more major storms, which is not true. Temperature differentials lead to major storms. You can get huge hurricanes by upper atmospheric cooling as much as by surface warming. And you can look at the storms on the outer gas giant planets as proof of that. All righty, we're going to grab a quick phone call. Gene in New York. Aloha, Gene. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, aloha, Mike. I want to bring up a couple of topics. One is, you're talking about the motives of these people, money junkies and everything like that. Well, during the battle against God, like in the Garden of Eve, Adam and Eve chose to rebel against God because they hated the fact that he was first and they were second. Like he was first cause and they were in effect. So that's what Blank Loingfine from Goldman Sachs once said. Mm-hmm. He said, like, we're doing God's work. I guess it must be the Old Testament God, you know, and they want to obliterate all of the original creation, and they want to make their own creation, which is like a nightmare, but they don't see it.
Well, you know, we don't need to go into biblical mythology. We understand that anybody in history who acquires enough wealth to themselves seems to decide, hey, I now have the power and therefore the right to remake the world in my own image. Nero in Rome, burning down half the city because he wanted to build a new one in its place. So I don't think, and you're right, Lloyd Blankfein, a lot of people were outraged by that statement he made at a time when Goldman Sachs was behind the financial collapse of Greece. Goldman Sachs was tied in with, first of all, selling California bonds and then betting against them with its own investors, the foreclosure fraud, all of that stuff going on. And then to stand up and saying, hey, we're doing God's work. You know, if you're doing God's work there, then God is a real bastard. Because, you know, a lot of people use God to justify their own personal greed. Bush was saying Holy Crusade when they started invading Iraq and everything. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're getting a report now that the Obama administration has reversed itself on the issue of financial aid to Egypt. And they're going to continue it for the new government, and I guess they realize that if they stop sending money, they've lost all control over what the new government of Egypt is going to do. Looking at some of those signs we're seeing the Egyptian protesters carry in Tahrir Square, I think the Egyptian people would just as soon that the U.S. not send over any more money because they're sick and tired of the strings that inevitably come with it. We're going to go back to the phones here. Susan in Florida. Aloha, Susan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Michael. I don't watch television, but I really get a lot of the news that's on the television by the people who come on YouTube and different various places who will comment on it or bring a story, as you have with Zimmerman. I made a connection. I may be right, I may be wrong, but here's my thought. Paula Deen, you've got to believe that is the most outrageous story we've ever heard. However, we have Zimmerman, and the prosecution is bending over backwards for the defense. He's going to get off. Now, what I believe this Paula Deen is they're building a feeling, a resentment, bad feelings. And then with Zimmerman, they figure, well, if he's let go, then there'll be a race riot. So I think they're being led down the rabbit hole here.
I agree.
And they're trying to create a situation where they can come in and bully us some more.
I agree. I absolutely agree. The Paula Deen thing, I have to wonder if it isn't just a publicity stunt, because before this whole story about she's being sued because she used the N-word years ago, I hadn't even heard about her. I had no idea who she was. So I sort of dismissed that as a clumsy PR stunt. But I absolutely agree with you about the Zimmerman case, and apparently the prosecution has rested. The defense is now petitioning the judge to simply dismiss the case and acquit Zimmerman, and saying the evidence is insufficient. We'll see what happens on that. If the judge kicks this out of the court, yeah, it's definitely going to be a problem. And again, I need everybody listening to this show, please, as you talk to people tonight, tomorrow, tell them the U.S. government would love nothing more than race riots from this Zimmerman trial in order to declare a state of emergency, trash what's left of our Constitution, start confiscating the guns. They want a little revolution they can crush down to deter a larger revolution they could not hope to win. Don't fall for it. Don't be as stupid as the government hopes you are being. But Susan, you're absolutely right, and I'm absolutely delighted that you came up with this on your own, because that means more and more Americans are looking at this and coming to the same conclusion.
I have one more point can I make.
Yeah, but you have to be fast. We're almost at the break.
Okay. One of the things they left out of the public reporting of all this thing with Zimmerman was when he made the first call about spotting this suspicious person, they told him not to take this any further, to cease and desist. Do not follow him. Do not stop. There's no need for you to go any further with this.
Yeah, and I know we have talked about that. Thank you for the call, Susan. Got to take a station identification break. We'll be back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. And aloha, America. And for those of you watching on Justin TV, the lovely creature sitting behind me is the ever-lovely Lady Claire, who joins us here on Fridays in our third hours with her unique perspective on the world. What's the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, the first thing I would like to talk about is the coverage of the Zimmerman trial. And I know that a lot of our readership are people who are part of some kind of faith community. And I have a little suggestion. If it looks like this guy is going to be acquitted or the judge throws the case out, talk to the leadership of your faith community, your minister, your priest, your rabbi, your imam, about creating some places of sanctuary in those churches where people can blow off steam in a peaceful, loving, supported environment. I will never forget Arsenio Hall and Edward James Olmos right after the LA riots, and my respect for them went up remarkably, because what they did, they appeared on every local news show, and they started out in front of these bombed out and burned out buildings with a broom and a mop. And they were telling the kids of LA, if you riot, there will be an order to shoot to kill. And I am afraid that if there is unrest relative to this, that same thing may happen again.
Yeah, that's the real problem here, is that right now our government is desperate for some kind of an incident they can use to justify further dictatorship. Originally, it was going to be Adam Kokesh and his armed march into D.C., which cratered because everybody knew it was a setup to demonize gun owners. Apparently, Adam actually did go into Washington yesterday with a gun and said, "Say, I have a gun here," which is a desperate and pathetic publicity stunt that nobody paid any attention to. But obviously, looking back at how the government exploited the Rodney King trial results, we know this government is desperate for some kind of a civil disturbance that they can use to declare a national emergency, to suspend what little remains of the Bill of Rights, to justify a complete gun ban. And all of these things we know they have been planning and lusting for all this time. So please, again, take a moment to share with your friends and family, your social media, that if Zimmerman is let go, don't react to it, because that is exactly what the government is hoping is going to happen. And I have absolutely no doubt they've already got their COINTELPRO informants out there in the neighborhoods, with making the Molotov cocktails and saying, we've got to strike back, we've got to burn down this, we've got to, and again, to create the kind of a situation that would allow the government to say, oh, national emergency, Constitution gone, you just do what we tell you from now on. And a whole new Reichstag fire, in several cities here. So please don't be as stupid as the government hopes you are.
Absolutely. And I would like to turn our attention a little bit to the economy in terms of, these jobs, that were created. Well, if you take a look at the raw numbers, the manufacturing jobs are continuing to collapse in this country, posting their fourth consecutive monthly drop in June to 11.964 million jobs. And the jobs that are being created are minimum wage jobs, waitresses, waitpersons, bartenders, etc., etc., etc.
And of course, part of that is the fact that because of Obamacare, employers are letting their full-time workers go. Full-time jobs dropped by 250,000, and they're being replaced with 2 or 3 part-time workers, so the employer doesn't have to go along with the whole Obamacare thing.
Right.
And so the job numbers, even as they say, unemployment dropped, they're misleading, because a part-time job is not the same thing as a full-time job.
No, definitely not, and very difficult to support yourself, let alone a family. I mean, we've got the magic music.
Yeah, the magic music. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back.
Okay.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Claire, you wanted to continue with the economy.
Yes, it looks like the train is coming off the wheels in terms of inflation. And there are a number of very respected economists who are saying that by the end of 2014, we are going to see a massive amount of hyperinflation. And yesterday we had a little exercise in this. We went to one of the local grocery stores that we go to on a pretty consistent basis. And I needed some dressing to use as a marinade. And I'm looking at the price, and I'm seeing for this very small bottle of salad dressing, $6.99. And I looked at Mike and I said, I do not know how people who have families are getting through this. It's got to be terrible.
Well, they're not, which is why you and I, after the radio show is over,
Yes.
we're going on out for the food program again.
Right.
And, no, it is now. Up until now, the inflationary pressure from all this quantitative easing and bond buyback has been held in check because these Wall Street firms, investment firms, banks, and so forth that are getting all this money, they're basically putting it in their own pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not flowing out into the economy as a whole, and as a result, we haven't had that problem of too much currency chasing too few goods and services that inevitably drive prices up, but they can't keep that up either because the entire justification for quantitative easing is for this money to somehow get back out into the society in the form of paying jobs.
Right.
Wall Street's attitude is, no, we're not going to give you the money or pay you the money. You will borrow it from us at interest to keep this little Ponzi scheme going a bit longer. And they're holding it all together by fraud, by corruption, by deception, and it's got a finite lifespan. It can't last forever.
Right. And one of the issues that will probably be driving prices up, the price of oil. Apparently, the Egyptian troops are on maximum alert at the Suez Canal, and it just sent oil over $102 a barrel. So if you are old enough, as I am, to remember odd even in California after the alleged Iranians taking the oil off the market in upset, when your tank is half filled, you might want to fill it up again. Just might, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know those of you with garages, you know, you might want to think about getting a gas can, 5-gallon gas can, just to have some on hand for emergencies. Please do not store it in your home.
Oh, no.
I remember during that whole gas shortage Iranian thing, there were all these stories. We were living in Southern California at the time about people who had drums of gas in their homes, and of course one spark and it goes up. So safety, 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 safety. But if you've got a garage and approved safe storage gasoline cans, this might be a good time to have a little extra on hand for your generators, for your car, for whatever. The situation, of course, is that Egypt knows that if Israel does invade the Sinai, they're going to want to grab that Suez Canal because that's a major revenue-generating canal for Egypt, and Israel would like that money. Plus, if Israel's in control of the Suez Canal, it dramatically changes the deployment of naval power in that part of the world. And so Egypt is very right to be concerned about possible attacks on Suez. They've already declared a state of emergency around the Suez and up with the border with Israel as well.
Right. And speaking of Israel, Kerry's diplomacy, or attempt at diplomacy, is a joke, but not a funny one. All of this back and forth to the Middle East has gained Kerry absolutely nothing in terms of attempting to broker some kind of an agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And his timing just absolutely bit. I mean, you've got a situation where Turkey's very unstable and in a lot of unrest. You've got the unrest in Egypt. You've got the unrest in Syria. And the Arab world doesn't have a chance to really unite and come behind the legitimate demands of the Palestinians. And the one thing I can't understand that he just doesn't get, the Israeli government doesn't really want peace. It wants territory, and it wants that territory, Mike, by any means necessary.
Absolutely. We were reporting earlier about while the world is focused on events in Egypt, Israel is escalating attacks against Palestinians in the West Bank. They were bombing Gaza City yesterday, ostensibly because there was a rocket attack into Israel. But even the Israeli forces are saying they heard something go bang but can't find any place that got hit. Maybe like the police in Las Vegas, they're reacting to a firework that went off. But again, Israel does not want peace. They want the Palestinians and Arabs to go away. They want all the land for themselves. Israel has never kept the requirements of any treaties they've ever agreed to before, whether it was the Oslo Accords or the Camp David Accords. Their attitude is, you do for us first, then we'll decide if we're going to do something for you, and they never really do. You know, Israel, if Israel truly wanted peace in the Mideast,
would have it.
Get it overnight by simply saying, we recognize Palestinians' right to exist.
Absolutely.
If Israel would grant to the Palestinians that which Israel demands for itself, recognition of a right to exist, we could have avoided 60 years of bloodshed, bombing, and horror.
And this wanting of territory by any means necessary is why we are seeing such a brisk uptick in the expulsion of Palestinians from homes and villages in which they have lived for generations, and the intense approval of Jewish-only residents in the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
All righty. Yeah, it is. Judge Israel by its actions, not by its words, not by its propaganda, not by its public relations machine, not by the megaphonies, not by the people who call into this show and scream that we're a Jew-hating network. Judge Israel by their deeds.
Right.
That's actually true for everybody. Judge what people do, not what they say, and you'll be in far safer territory. What do you want to talk about next?
Next, I'd like to talk about the situation in Syria, where the city of Homs is getting pounded by both the Syrian army and Hezbollah militants. Syrian troops just are taking down whole sections of the central city of Homs on Friday and pounding opposition-held areas with artillery and airstrikes for the 6th straight day. And it looks as though they are ready to gut the city in order to take it back completely from the rebels. Now, I
don't want to use that term rebels. These are not. These are not rebels. This is a
hired mercenaries.
Mercenary army pretending to be a popular uprising. 95% of the Free Syria Army are not Syrian, and they have been caught with weapons sent in by Israel and by the United States. It's a covert attempt at an overthrow. Before the U.S. and Israel kicked this all up, Syria was in peace. They had a pluralistic society where all religions lived peacefully side by side, same thing that they had in Iraq before the U.S. went into there. And all of this has been created out of thin air to further this policy of going back to the petrodollar, of making sure that Syria only sells their oil for the U.S. dollar, forcing Bretton Woods on the back onto the rest of the world. And
the one thing I would like someone to explain to me is how these hired mercs can possibly be expected to regroup next month successfully and overthrow the al-Assad government, something which, in spite of being Western trained, equipped, and paid, they haven't been able to do for the last 2 years. And I think the short answer is they can't. So it is looking more and more that if the West does want to overthrow al-Assad, they're going to have to do it with an overt military attack, risking war with Russia.
Well, that is very, very tricky right now, because the original blueprint for the U.S. invasion of Syria had Turkey as the northern front to come across the border. Well, now Turkey is dealing with their internal strife by a population that is fed up with their government serving Israel and the United States. And so they were looking at going down to Jordan. But remember, up until Morsi fell, Egypt was in favor of Syrian no-fly zone and getting Assad, and now the Egyptian people have stood up and said, we're tired of having a government that serves Israel and the United States. And so between the loss of Turkey and the loss of Egypt, the idea of a direct military intervention into Syria is getting very dicey, with the Russian fleet sitting off the shore in the eastern Mediterranean.
Right, absolutely. So, Mike, how do you see this playing out?
I think that absent a direct U.S. military intervention or a direct Israeli intervention, going back in there with bombers and bombing the place some more, like they've already been doing, I think the Syrian government is going to capture the hired mercenaries. They're going to parade them on view to the entire world to show that it wasn't an honest, legitimate uprising, but an attempt by the United States to use the Arab Spring for more covert regime change. And I think Assad is going to prevail.
That would be an interesting turn of things.
Okay, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks, Mike, and Claire, God bless you. Hey, Mike, I wanted to just share this real quick. Last night, we shot off about 600 rockets to the heavens. The police went by and left us alone. We had the whole half of the town of Blois smoked out, brother, so let freedom ring.
Well,
you know,
lucky
Mike,
you, because we're not even allowed sparklers out here in Hawaii.
Yeah, pretty bad.
Yeah, I know. Hey, Mike, you're Claire's awake too. You know that Middle East thing. We talked years ago about this Middle East powder keg ready to blow. They're just moving the puppet strings, brother. We talked about this chess game of bringing out the pawns and the castles and the bishops. Now we're getting into the dicey point of bringing out the queens, and pretty soon, like you said, with up in the top of the Mediterranean, Russia sitting there, and you see the triangle. You see Syria, Iran, and Russia. And you're exactly right. If you sit there and you mess around.
Okay, we got to take a break. We got to take a break. Scott, I'm going to bring you back after the commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Scott in Wisconsin. And Scott, I'm absolutely in agreement. This plan they had for step-by-step war and conquest leading to war with Iran has definitely hit some major potholes in the road. The turmoil in Turkey, the turmoil in Egypt, has removed from that chessboard a couple of the pieces the U.S. was relying on in order to, they believe, guarantee themselves victory in Syria leading on to Iran. And, of course, Russia continues to send a very clear, unequivocal message. When you go into Syria and or Iran, we will turn it into the new Vietnam and wear the United States down in a war of attrition. And Russia can do it. The U.S. can't. The U.S. is militarily exhausted, economically exhausted. They've certainly lost the moral authority in the eyes of the world. And if you go back to your Sun Tzu and the Art of War, the side that does not have the moral law is the side that's going to lose. Now, for the bankers who are behind all of this stuff, they don't care if the U.S. loses. They love wars. The bigger, the better, and they don't care which side wins or loses because both sides go into debt to fight the war, and then both sides have to go further into debt to rebuild from the war. So all these bankers, even on Wall Street, they don't care if the U.S. loses. All they're concerned about is driving up this debt that everybody will be enslaved to for the next 100 years.
Well, Michael, you're exactly right. I totally agree with you, and I'll just slow down and I'll finish up. I'm glad you brought me back. You're exactly right. So what I see in the paradigm is that war, and how long has that war been going on in Syria? I know
almost
for a couple
3 years. Almost 3 years.
Yeah, yeah. And you got Russia sitting up there, and I totally am on the same page with you. I do not think they're going to move Assad before. And the dangerous part about this is, Brother Mike, and I love your wife, Claire, the dangerous part about this is when you exhaust your military and you exhaust it out, what do you resort to? And what do we got in the back of our parking lot? And I'll leave it like that. So, Mike, you have a peaceful and Claire, a peaceful and a safe weekend ahead of you there, and thanks for taking my call.
We'll be safe. We're not allowed to have sparklers here. But you do know, everybody needs to remember, there is already a piece of draft legislation sitting in committee in Congress waiting for the opportunity where they can take it to the floor for a vote, and it does include drafting young girls into combat roles. So they're ready to go as soon as they get the new Pearl Harbor or the newer Pearl Harbor or something where they believe the American people are going to be all hot and bothered for a new war. They'll put that draft bill through and start drafting our young men and young women to rebuild the military. And you need to remember something. A military draft is a violation of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the Involuntary Servitude Amendment. It's actually illegal. They go through this little trick where they tell the inductees, if you're going to fight for America, step forward. And aha, that means you volunteered even though they brought you down there on a bus and threatened you with jail if you didn't show up at the bus stop. And so it's, again, it's unconstitutional to have a military draft in this country. All right, so Claire, what was next on your list?
Next on my list is Pentagon is throwing some more naval forces into the Persian Gulf, and they have deployed 3 additional coastal patrol ships to its 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. And the USS Tempest, the Squall, and the USS Thunderbolt arrived Wednesday at the port of Manama, which brings the total number of patrol craft to 8. And I think that this deployment, and first of all, that we are even in and headquartered in Bahrain for the 5th Fleet, should be a tremendous embarrassment to a government that talks about human dignity and human rights, but where the government of this country is absolutely suppressing its Shiite minority, and to the point where even the doctors who treated the protesters, who were protesting peacefully, even the doctors and nurses, the medical response teams, were also getting prosecuted for treating the protesters.
For treating the
we shouldn't be there in the first place.
No, we shouldn't. And we have this classic situation of the U.S. pouring weapons into Syria because there's supposedly a popular uprising. There's a popular uprising in Bahrain, but the U.S. is siding with the government because the government is friendly to the U.S. and they don't want to lose the harbor for the Fifth Fleet. And they're trying to project power and garrison the world. The U.S. is using their carrier battle groups the way Rome used the legions to keep the provinces in line. And that's a very ugly situation. What's next on your list?
Next is a very interesting development that happened today that got absolutely no fanfare in any of the corporate talking heads reading whatever they were reading. Pakistan and India are setting their sights on an Arabian Sea link. And what they're going to do is develop a transport link from northwestern China through the Pakistani mountains to the Arabian Sea to boost economic growth and slash shipping times. And it's a long-term plan, and it's going to connect the Chinese city of Kashgar with the port of Gwadar, more than 2,000 kilometers, about 1,200 miles away. And another agreement that we're seeing is that there's going to be fiber optic cable laid from the Chinese border to the Pakistani city of Rawalpindi that will boost Pakistan's access to international communications network.
All right, we've got to take a break for commercials, and you'll tell us the ramifications of this after these words from our sponsors. And welcome back to our show here. And Claire, you're talking about the ramifications of this new commerce communications corridor between China and
Pakistan. And what it's going to do is it's going to massively increase trade, massively increase Pakistan's reliance, if you will, on China. And what this looks like to me, Mike, is that this is part of China's strategy to block the U.S.'s quote-unquote Asian pivot. And it's not being overtly done with military means, as the U.S. is trying to do, but it's being done with trade. Let's make a deal.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The U.S. is making war, and everybody else is making deals. Why? The U.S. has nothing left to make deals with. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture.
Nope.
Nobody wants our manufactured goods, those few that we still make.
Yeah.
Nobody wants our banking system anymore. Even if they're okay with private central banking, they don't want the U.S. dollar anymore because it's in such serious trouble. They don't trust it. And that's, peace through commerce. And the U.S. government is taking this attitude of you're only allowed to do your commerce on the globe through banknotes you borrow from the Federal Reserve. It's a return to the Currency Act of King George III. You will conduct your business only using banknotes borrowed from our favored bank. In the case of King George III, it was the Bank of England and the American colonies. In the case of the present situation, they're trying to do that with the entire planet. You will only carry out your business internationally using the U.S. dollar, and the rest of the world wants nothing to do with it. And that is the real underlying cause of all of these wars of aggression being carried out by the U.S. government to force the world back to Bretton Woods, to force the world back to the petrodollar and the copper dollar and the molybdenum dollar. And it's not going to work. The U.S. has burnt itself out, and Russia and China absolutely are united against the U.S. Reimposing, the dollar as the global currency.
Yes, it has. And the only way that we can change that is fix that fundamentally from within.
The only way to fix it, of course, is to abandon this model of private central banking for the failure that it is and go back to public currency as a public utility.
Yes.
And that was what the American Revolution was all about back in 1776, throwing off forced dependency on banknotes borrowed at interest from a private bank, and fought a revolution for the right to create an honest money system.
Which we do not have right now.
And the world has been at war over this issue between the private bankers and planet Earth to keep the world enslaved to this private central banking scam. And that's behind all the assassinations and all the wars. The common enemy of all mankind are those private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest.
Yes, it really does.
Okay, next on your list.
Next on my list, the state of Missouri is threatening the return of gas chambers for death row inmates. And their attorney general is saying the state Supreme Court must allow quick executions before lethal injection drugs run out. And they're threatening to resurrect the use of the gas chamber for executions as an alternative to the dwindling supply of lethal injection drugs, because many of the companies that make those are refusing to sell them to American states because of how they are used. Now,
wait a minute, let me back up here.
Yeah.
All right, so they're worried about these drugs used for lethal injection being past their expiration dates.
Yes.
So these drugs that they pump into somebody to kill them, they
Yes.
don't want to use anymore because they might not be safe.
I know that there is a very dark irony here. And yes, hello, state of Missouri. Now, I am, as a single individual, I'm vehemently opposed to the death penalty because it makes the state just as much a murderer as the convicted murderer. I don't think there is a really kind way to kill people, even via lethal injection. I think that life in prison at hard labor should be the outcome for everyone really convicted.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think after all these years of capital punishment in the United States of America, the case could be made it's not a deterrent, especially in the case of people who are driven to acts of violence by the medications that they are on. But for me, the major point is we know beyond a shadow of a doubt there are people in this country who are wrongfully convicted through government prosecutorial fraud. We know there are people who are wrongfully executed, Bruno Richard Hauptmann being the classic case. And until we can restore life to those it is wrongfully taken from, we should not take life in the first place. And I'm in agreement with Claire, throw them in jail, hard labor, make them do something to make some kind of restitution here. I understand there are crimes for which even the death penalty seems like inadequate punishment for what they have done. But we know our present justice system is unjust. We know there's a major scandal going on right now with crime labs fudging their data. Even the FBI's own crime lab was caught rigging tests to favor the prosecution. The whistle was blown on them by Frederick Whitehurst, the head of the lab itself, that the government rigs the lab tests to push whatever the government policy is. We saw that certainly in TWA 800, where they were rigging the lab test to try and sell this idea that the red residue was seat glue. And because we know that people are being executed by the state wrongfully for crimes they did not commit, we cannot allow capital punishment at all until we have the ability to give life back to those it is taken from wrongfully.
Right. I'd like to move on to another topic that is very scary to me.
Okay.
Apparently there is a frightening new trend in the medical community, which is to prescribe psychoactive stimulant medication to children from low-income families to boost their academic performance. And doctors are actually prescribing ADHD drugs to these students. But here's the kicker. These kids do not have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And
well, it was a made-up illness anyway. The guy who sort of created that whole idea, shortly before he passed away, he went public and said, it's just something we invented to sell medications. And attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I'll tell you what the problem is, because we had the same problem when I was a kid in grade school. It's called the teacher is boring me. Because the teacher is spending so much time with the dullards, the smarter kids got nothing to occupy their attention, so their attention wanders and they start playing with things in the classroom. They start looking out the window. That's normal behavior. The problem with academic performance in this country has nothing to do with the kids and everything to do with the decline in the teaching profession, now that it's a trade with the union, and the fact that our public schools are not about education, they're about indoctrination. They're in there being told how to sell Obamacare.
Yes.
You know, how to, global warming, we've got to convince our parents to go along with carbon taxes. They're turning the public schools into simply a propaganda training course. So your kids come home and say, oh, this is what you should think. I know you don't believe the TV set anymore, but I am your child and you will believe what I tell you. And so when these kids who spend all their time learning about Obamacare and global warming and the rest of it, when they're actually tested for actual academic skill, they're coming up short compared to the rest of the world. And it shows we've got a government that's only thinking about a couple of months down the line, or maybe at worst a couple of years, and they're not thinking about restoring the American economy and technological supremacy, because those courses, science, education, are in serious decline in our public school system. Kids are literally having to go outside the school system to learn things about computers and science and engineering, which would allow them to actually have decent jobs should they ever come back to this country.
Right. And it seems that what this is, it's a made-up excuse for a social and educational environment unwilling to spend money on changing the environment, and instead they're opting to change the kid.
Well, it's just another excuse to sell more medication. You know, say, you, the parent, you must pay for this medication we, the school, and government have decided your child should have. And these medications are dangerous. Go over to ssristories.com or go to my website, whatreallyhappened.com, and look for that giant pill in the right margin. And you will see all these stories about how these medications not only muddle your thinking so you can't learn, they lead to violence and suicide. In fact, there's another story here just came out today. This is over in the Daily Mail in Great Britain, where a man who murdered his own mother said in court it was the antidepressant drugs just made him crazy, wacko, homicidal. And this news story ends by saying, oh, he'd actually stopped taking his medication a couple of days before, so obviously the medication was not to blame. Nonsense. If you go back over to ssristories.com, you will see that it is when people have been taking these medications for a while and they withdraw is when they're most likely to go into these episodes of violence and suicide. And the corporate media in Great Britain, like the corporate media here in the United States, they're so concerned with protecting the profitability of their advertisers who sell these medications. They don't want to hear these medications are harmful. They don't want to hear that GMO is harmful. We've got another story that came out here. Apparently there's evidence saying that glyphosate, the herbicide inside Roundup, on which that whole Roundup Ready commercial enterprise is built, is being shown to contribute to human infertility. But we can't say that because, you know, Monsanto advertises on our giant corporate media network and we can't offend them. And, you know, getting back to this SSRI situation, Congress has already held hearings looking into the link between these prescription psychiatric medications which are being prescribed to treat imaginary made-up diseases as a huge money-making venture. Congress already investigated the links to violence, but because these pharmaceutical industries are major campaign donors, Congress did absolutely nothing. They've sat inside that huge little building in the middle of Washington, D.C. and said, yes, there's a problem there, but really we don't think we should call attention to it.
And, Mike, you know, with the large, big pharmaceutical companies, they sponsor the campaigns of various people in Congress to a really large degree, and they don't want that money going away.
No, they absolutely don't. It's the same corruption we see again in the corporate media. Look at how Proposition 37 in California, it just makes so much sense that you should have on the label of a product contains GMO ingredients. And Monsanto fought that tooth and nail. They went to every corporate media outlet in California and said, if you do not publicly oppose Proposition 37, we will not advertise with you anymore. And the managers of those corporate media outlets said, oh, no, we can't lose that revenue. We've got to have that money coming in. Oh, we're opposed to GMO labeling. You, the consumer, don't need to know what's in that food that you're eating. We already know it's safe, blah, 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 blah. Now, there's a little bit of positive news on that front, not to digress too much from what you're saying.
Right.
Remember a while back there was a study on GMO, corn, and Roundup a pesticide conducted in France that showed they basically tracked the lab rats through their entire life cycle. When Monsanto was claiming that GMO and Roundup was safe, they stopped the testing at 3 months. Oh, we don't see symptoms at 3 months. The rats still look healthy. It must be okay for human consumption. The French study showed starting at 4 months is when the rats started getting all these tumors, and all these other health problems. They died prematurely. That just a horrible, horrible situation. And the government of France said, we dismiss this report. They didn't refute any of the facts in it. They simply said, we dismiss it for the purposes of setting French public policy. In other words, eat your GMOs. They're good for you. Meanwhile, of course, we know that Monsanto's own cafeterias ban GMOs. The White House bans GMO. The restaurants in Parliament in Great Britain ban GMOs. They know this is a problem, but they won't do anything about it. The Russians are now in the middle of their 2-year study of rats being fed GMO and Roundup, and now, apparently, despite France's dismissal of this report, the European Union has just commissioned a study of the carcinogenic effects of glyphosate. And so this is it's all starting to bubble up. And yet Monsanto, because of their money power, is able to get the U.S. government to say, really, you don't need to worry about GMO, and yet the health of the average American is in decline. The age at which you begin to suffer multiple chronic medical problems is getting younger and younger. Our average lifespan in America is in decline. But the pharmaceutical companies and the hospitals and the HMOs, they're raking the money in like crazy, and they're going to be getting even more under Obamacare. We have the most expensive medical care on earth, and it's something like 30th in quality. We have an infant mortality rate on the same level as some third world countries, because it's all driven by money and selling product, not what is best for the population. They don't want you to be healthy. If you're healthy, if you're cured, they can't make any more money off of you. They need you to be sick. They want you to be sick so they can constantly be selling you more pills, more lotions, more stuff to rub in your hair or into your belly button, because that's what it's all about. And I want to make a point here, because I'm always getting all this email about, oh, you just hate the rich. No, I don't hate the rich. I'd like to be rich myself, okay? There's nothing wrong with being rich. Look at people like James Cameron or Steve Jobs. That's how you're supposed to get rich. You come up with something people need and voluntarily trade their money for. You don't go out and knock somebody in the kneecap and then sell them a leg brace. That's not capitalism, okay? And I have nothing against people's wanting to be rich, because I'd like to be rich myself. But society cannot function if making money is the only priority that anybody has. It's got to be balanced with what's good for society as a whole, keeping the people healthy, keeping them productive, keeping things peaceful and calm and quiet, allowing people to buy quality products that don't fail 3 days out of the warranty. We've allowed money junkyism to completely subvert what is best in human nature, in the American people, and it's time to reverse that.
I couldn't agree more.
All right.
Couldn't agree more.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
All right,
Thank
I'm going to
so
turn
much.
down your microphone. We're almost here to our last commercial break. And the phone lines are still open, 800-313-9443. We've got time for one more phone call as we head into that final break and head into the end of Friday and into the weekend. And, wow, that's weird. I feel like I was on vacation holiday just yesterday here. A little science story we're going to end this segment with. The traditional view of history is that Europeans first came to Australia with the arrival of Captain James Cook in 1770. Now archaeologists have found the skull of a European that dates back to the 1600s. So it's a little reminder that what we think we know of history does not often survive the test of time and science. And there's a lot of arrogance in the presentation of history. Yes, we know exactly what happened, then you're proven wrong. And it's a reminder that even recent history is subject to revision and alteration for political and financial purposes. We're going to be back here. We've got a phone call waiting on the line. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab one more phone call here. Dennis in, I think it's Missouri. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello?
Hello. You're on the air.
Yeah, this is Dennis. I hope I can contribute something positive. You talked about SSRIs. About 10 years ago, they put me on Zoloft, and I thought I could just go cold turkey because it wasn't doing anything for me, and I about went out of my mind. And then I figured out I had to wean myself.
Yes, you do. You do.
I believe everything you say.
When my wife was dealing with her joint pain from the formaldehyde precursors, they had her on, I think it was Neurontin. And they messed her up really badly, and she told her doctor she was just going to quit them, and the doctor did not tell her you had to taper down slowly, and she got really, really sick. And
drive you out of your mind.
They are. Now, yes, there are people who are on these medications where they don't seem to drive them to craziness, but a significant portion of these people are driven to these acts of violence and suicide. It's a dangerous product. I mean, we're out here being told we should surrender all of our guns. 80% of Americans have guns, but we should give them all up because every once in a while there's somebody who goes crazy with a gun. And yet we're told, take these prescription antidepressants, they're good for you. And even though a significant number of people are harmed by these things, that it's okay to go on buying and taking these things.
Yeah, well, that's all I wanted to tell you. I just hope your listeners got their ears open.
Well, I think they are, and we're beginning to understand this government does not, in fact, execute any oversight function on corporations in this country in terms of the safety and efficacy of either pharmaceuticals or food items. It's just all driven by making money and making sure that those Congress critters who support the corporations get the campaign donations and so forth and so on.
Yep. Okay. I'll let you go.
Thanks an awful lot. All right, well, we're coming down here to the end of the show. We are not hearing anything coming out of the Zimmerman case. I know the defense moved for dismissal and acquittal, and I'm not hearing that it went one way or the other. I think if the judge had thrown the case out, it would be headline news, and so this is going to pick up next week. But again, the way they're just constantly fanning their racial angle. We're seeing all these stories about, these Twitter posts that are saying there are going to be riots and violence against whites if Zimmerman's allowed to walk. It just feels like it's a setup that the U.S. government wants to trigger some kind of race riots in multiple cities to declare a national emergency. Please don't fall for it, and please take time as you go about your business, talk to your friends, your family, your co-workers. Just say, stay calm. Don't engage in violence that the government can use to extend their draconian control over our lives. Right now, the government is trying to find some way they can shut down all of the gates. They want to take complete control of the independent media and shut them down and say you will get your news only from the U.S. government-approved sources. And we're really in a very dark time in the nation's history. And I think a lot of people coming out of yesterday's Independence Day celebrations realize what we have now is not the nation we were all taught we lived in. I hear the music. It's time for us to get out of here. We'll be back Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices, have a safe weekend. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.